This is Labor Update, a program concerning issues in today's changing world. With your host, Everett Miller, Professor of Labor Studies at Dundalk Community College.
Hello, welcome to Labor Update. My name is Everett Miller. I'm the Maryland Director of Labor Studies, and I'm the Maryland Labor Chaplain. And here at Dundalk Community College, we have programs for working class people. We have the only accredited, public-supported labor studies program to train people in the world of work. And we welcome you to get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to talk to you no matter what your interests may be in college. My name is Everett Miller, and you can reach me here at Dundalk Community College. Today on Labor Update, we're very fortunate to have an outstanding man in the world of labor as our special guest. This is the Honorable Thomas Bracken, who is a retired judge, and we welcome you to our program, Tom. And you've had a very interesting life. Why don't we go back to the very beginning? What was the first job you ever had?
The first job I ever had was at the Electromotive Corporation in LaGrange, Illinois, on the assembly line of building diesel streamlined trains. It happened I got out of Loyola College, and my father knew a vice president of the B&O Railroad. With that brilliant background, I got a job out in LaGrange, Illinois. I got out there, and I found that the fellow on my left on the assembly line was a Naval Academy graduate. The fellow on my right was a Lehigh graduate. They were on that assembly line because their fathers knew the vice president of some railroad. And the entire plant, except for the very skilled machinists and tool and die makers, everyone was in there because he knew somebody. And a Lehigh graduate, any kind of a college graduate, you were happy to get a job.
That's right. What year was this again?
1937.
And everybody was out of work.
Everybody knew. There would be 5,000 people outside the gate, laid off employees who had worked at Western Electric or places like that, Crane Company, looking for work. The men who had been making $2 an hour as a machinist would come glad to come to work there at 70 cents an hour. Very skilled machinists. Tool and die makers got $1 an hour. Yeah. I was a very poor mechanic, and they put me in paperwork, expediting material to the different shops. Then when the war started, in 1941, I came back to Baltimore. And I went in the Navy, and after I got out of the Navy, I was served on an ocean tugboat. After I got out, I went to work for a truck line. The main one was Baltimore Transfer Motor Freight Express. That was a very fine mid-regional carrier. We went from Richmond to New York to Pittsburgh with about 23 terminals in between. With motor freight, I got into handling grievances with the Teamsters, just by accident, not by design. And I handled freight claims, and I got to know Teamster Union officials. And in 1950, I graduated from the University of Maryland Law School, night school, and a few months later, I hung up a shingle paying another lawyer, Claude Caligari, who you know, a very prominent union attorney in town, and he charged me $20 a month for a half of an office. And I used to go down there and wait for a client to call me up, and few called me. After several months, the Teamsters did call me. George Willinger was president of Teamsters Local 557, and I think it was an act of the Lord, Everett, I really do. I, at that time, had 5 kids. I started law school in 1946 with 3. I had to have some money coming in for milk and bread, and when I left the trucking company, I went up to Getz's Meat House, and I loaded trucks from 11 at night to 8 in the morning to bring a paycheck home to my wife. And I did that for almost 6 months, and I was really beat. I was only getting 3 or 4 hours sleep a night. Sometimes on the floor of Caligari's office waiting for a client to come in who wanted an appointment. All the truck drivers wanted to see me after supper. I had thought I would sleep from 2 to 8 o'clock at night and then go up to Getz's and work, but it didn't work out that way. So I got this phone call from George Willinger, and why I say I think it was an act of the Lord, he said to me on the phone, Tommy, what do you know about the Wage Stabilization Act? I said, George, to tell you the truth, I don't know a darn thing about it. he said, "You know all about it, huh?" Then I heard him, I could picture him turning to somebody in the room, and he said, "Tom, he says he knows all about it." And he said to me, "Can you come over here right away?" I said, "George, let me look at my calendar." I didn't have an appointment for anybody for any time. I said, "Yeah, George, I can make it today." Well, when I worked for Motor Freight, I had a company car. But when I went out to practice law, I didn't have a car. I had to use buses, streetcars. But I grabbed a cab and went over to the Teamsters Hall. And a fellow named Tom Flynn, who was the chairman of the Eastern Conference of Teamsters, and a great guy.
Yeah, I know him, and I knew him, and I know his son.
His son Bob is now a very high official with the Teamsters. They're both originally from Chicago, great family. And Flynn talked to me, and he said, thank God he didn't ask me what I knew about the Wage Stabilization Act, because I would have told the truth. He said, "Well, can you handle a case tomorrow in Richmond, Virginia?" Let's see, tomorrow. I said, "Let me see if I got anything on my calendar." "No, Tom, I can make it." So that night I had to scurry around the bar library to find a copy of the Wage Stabilization Law to see what it was. What it was, it regulated how employees could get raises during the Korean War. Now, what had happened, I went down there to represent the milk and ice cream drivers, Local 937. You knew one of
Joe
the
Townsley.
Great union officials of that local, Joe Townsley.
Yeah.
At that time, Joe was working for Crest Farm Dairy. He wasn't a union official.
And my father was a manager.
That's right. You know Joe well. And driving down to Richmond, I'm reading the act. They got two union officials sitting here, and they tell me what the story was. The Teamsters, the milk drivers, they got paid 6 cents for, let's see now, they made the majority of their money like on a 35% commission on all the milk they sold, milk and bread and rolls and stuff like that. And then they got $6 for bringing back empty glass bottles. What had happened in the early part of the war, the fellows got 6 cents for every empty bottle they bought back. Well, naturally, there became arguments about the milk driver said, "I bought back 280 bottles yesterday," and the checker on the platform would say, "No, you didn't. You only bought back 192. So they had arguments about this nickel early in the war years, and finally, to avoid those problems, the company and the union agreed, okay, we'll pay the drivers $6 flat amount a week to bring the bottles back. No arguing about whether you bring back 1,000 or whether you bring back 197. So what the Wage Stabilization Board had done, they gave a 7%, or it might have been a 10% raise, they looked on the $6 as their base pay.
Yeah.
Some clerk had looked at the financial reports of Green Spring Dairy and Seal Test and the rest of the dairies, and they all saw this $6. And so they gave them 6 or 7 or 10% increase on $6. That was the raise they'd given the milk drivers union. They hadn't considered the bulk of their pay, which was they'd average $75 a week in commissions.
Yes.
And so naturally, the milk drivers in Baltimore were very exercised that they were going to get a 10% increase on $6. So when they told me the facts, I must say that hardly any lawyer in the world could have lost that case. And when I presented those facts to the hearing commissioner down in Richmond, they immediately saw what the problem was.
Right.
So they rescinded the 10% or whatever the increase, it wasn't over 10%. They rescinded that and made it on the average commission for 13 weeks plus the $6. So that night we drove back to the Teamsters Hall, and about 1,500 very angry and edgy milkmen were waiting in the Teamsters Hall for their officials to come back from Richmond.
They still do that.